really
Yeah.
good.
But,
I don't.
oh
I'm
well.
just everybody, and welcome to the March 18th Budget Facilities Committee meeting. I have to speak louder because the microphone is across the room, so we appreciate everybody bearing with our first in-person meeting. It's nice to see everybody's faces in person at the table. So we scheduled this meeting today. Really, everyone knows we've been doing these budget presentations, and we've kind of gotten a sense of what the asks are of the various units of the district in the evening meetings. But we really wanted to spend some time today to focus both for the community and the board's benefit on making sure we're all using the same language and nomenclature to describe the different aspects of the budget and the budget process, and also to make sure that everybody on the board, as we're talking about all of the wants and asks and dreams, that we actually understand in reality where we stand today as it relates to the greater budget for the 22-23 school year. So Mrs. O'Hara has prepared a presentation that basically answers those two questions. So unless anyone has any questions now, I'm going to give Mrs. O'Hara the floor to walk us through first the the terminology and then where we are.
Good morning, everybody. And if anybody would like to follow along, the presentation is under board docs. Just to review the budget calendar, we've already had 3 budget meetings where we reviewed several departments. We'll be having another one on March 22nd, where we'll provide an overview of the revenues, and we'll still look at personnel, the ELL program, the BOCES, the driver's ed, and adult ed as well. And then on April 5th, we've added another meeting to actually review the budget and just have a summary and basically present the various options of where we are. So then we'll have budget adoption on April 12th. We'll have a public hearing on May 3rd, and then May 17th will be the annual budget vote and school board election. So a lot of the slides in here you've seen before, but I'm just really providing it so those in the public who are watching, I think repetition is always good so people feel that they understand where we're coming from and it's transparent. So the tax levy threshold has been around for this is the 11th year. And this year, the allowable levy growth factor is 2%, which is the lesser of the rate of inflation, which is 4.5. So if you go to the next page, I guess, you look at the tax levy limit calculation. And this is what I wanted to spend a little bit of time on because it's very technical, but I think if you understand the different terms, it'll help people to understand. So you're starting with your tax levy limit from last year, what was actually levied. And then we're looking at a tax-based growth factor. So this is 0.0034 for this year. That number is received from the Office of Real Property Services. And what this is, it reflects actual brick and mortar improvements to the land in Port Washington. So we times the levy from last year by this, and we come up with a number. From that, we add in the pilot's receivable to come up with the levy limit. And then we're going to deduct the actual capital exclusions from last year. And on that number, that's when you're going to multiply it by the allowable the allowable growth factor, which is the 2% I was speaking about, or the CPI. So now from that number, you're going to withdraw the amount of pilots receivable from what we expect for next year. So the reason this is increasing compared to the one above, you have Channel Drive, there's a piece of property, 101 Channel Drive, that's going to be coming on. And you've also received slightly higher pilots than what was reflected here. So some years you don't always know the exact amount, so this is trying to reflect that increase. So now this comes up with your tax levy limit, the 140. Now to the 140, you can actually add your capital exclusions, and you'll see this is $11,398,000. In the capital exclusions is your debt service, your energy performance contract, a BOCES capital expenditures, and that's a figure that BOCES gives to us. And then also capital expenditures this is what we actually think we're gonna spend in that year, not necessarily what's being transferred to capital. So when we transfer money from capital into the general fund, from the general fund into the capital fund, we don't always expend it because we need approval from the state. So that's why this number is the 2.5. And then from that number, we reduce it by the building aid because we're receiving aid from the state on that, which leads you to your total capital exclusions of 9 million. So what you would do is you add the 9 million to the 140 up above, and this gives you your tax levy limit with exclusions. So this tax levy limit, the 150 million, this represents 2.583, and this is your rate. Like, this is the threshold that you should not be going over. If you choose to go over it, you would need a supermajority vote. So really the tax levy limit is really just tell schools what they need to do. Can they just get a simple majority, 50% plus 1, or do you need a supermajority?
So, quick question.
Sure.
Okay, well, I'll go around.
Speak
So,
up.
sorry, so just to be very clear, the property tax cap of 2.583, that's not the statutory number, the 2.0 is the number, and then
No.
this is being driven
Actually,
from your calculation?
no, so the 2.583 is Port Washington's limit.
Right.
So other schools could have 4.5. But
Right, so it's not like 2.583 is like written somewhere, you're getting to that by doing this calculation
yes, but this
based on the 2.0% growth in the base.
in the base,
Okay,
correct.
I'm
So,
clear.
yeah,
Okay.
so that's important for the public to understand also. That's why we try not to call it a 2% tax cap, because a lot of times people think, oh, if you're over 2%, that's too much. But each school district has unique circumstances. They have different debt service, they have different capital projects that they're doing. The debt service is all from voter-approved budgets from the past, so that's why it's in here as an exclusion. So the 2.58 is what Port Washington's tax limit is.
And just so I understand, like, if you took the capital expenditure number, for example, and you made it 3.0 or 2.0 million, that would change based on, that would actually change the allowable tax
2.5.
cap, right? So that number is really a calculated number, it's not really a number that we have to work towards, just to be clear for,
Right, well,
Yeah.
it's something that goes to the state, and it's a number that would tell us if you're going to have a levy that exceeds that, you need the supermajority. And if you're under it or right there, you just need a simple majority.
Dr. Block?
My only question is, so the 140 million
Yes,
in the nice light blue,
Mhm.
there's nothing we can do about that. In other words, like, that is just, that is handed down to us on high, and so that's just life. So the only thing we have control over is the 11 million, that's just below.
the 11, well, right, some of the 11 million, you do have slight control over with your transfer to capital.
Oh, the capital expenditure.
Yes, right.
So not even the 11 million, so it's
No, you
just.
don't, because you
So
have
the
debt.
2.5 million is the only thing that we have any control over of the 150 million that we have calculated.
Of the exclusion.
In order to stay under the levy limit.
That's, all right, that's what I wanted to know. There's no control in most of these things on the revenue side.
Okay, let's go around, for the board members, starting with Julie, if you have questions, and then anybody else?
Good.
Okay, awesome, all yours.
Okay, so the next slide about the 3 tax levy numbers, that's just really for reference and for the public also, if they would like better understanding, because sometimes it helps to read it over a few times too and look at the formula that I've provided. So I think we've covered that pretty much, so unless anybody has questions related to that.
Am I allowed to ask questions now?
Yeah, absolutely.
Oh, okay.
I think we should go
Yeah,
along the
as
way.
we-
Okay, that's good, then I just wanted to go back up to the tax levy limit calculation on the tax base growth factor,
Yes.
brick and mortar improvements. Does that reflect improvements that homeowners made to their homes?
Yes.
So is that the way the state is gauging this community may be able to support more because they're making improvements to their home? Is
No.
that?
No,
So what
that's
is the rationale behind that?
sure. So my understanding of it is, people's assessments may go up because they've made improvements to their house. That's something that the county looks at and the assessor's office. The tax base growth factor is maybe you have more people moving into your district, so they've built houses, or maybe people are putting extensions on and they have more students. So you would be sending more students to the school, so you're growing. So they're saying it's okay to take last year's levy and increase it by this amount because you've grown. So that's kind of, I think, an easier way to understand
I
this.
see.
Yeah, because they have like, and I can answer this from my real estate background, but basically, you have the total assessment of the whole town. If the assessment can change with each person's assessment can change, it doesn't impact what a taxing authority can ask them for, it just changes their share. But it's actual physical additions to that tax base, a new house, a new commercial building, and then that grows the total assessment of the community.
I'm curious, do we know within the past few years where this number falls, like by comparison?
I can definitely get you a historical perspective. Last year, I think it was pretty flat. I want to say it was like 0.002.
So this is an increase over.
This is a thing.
Okay, that's all I
Yeah.
needed to know.
Some districts are at 0, so we're kind of fortunate.
Okay, thank you.
We're always gonna have very limited growth in this town, because there's just nowhere,
Nowhere to go.
nowhere to
then.
go.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Unless you go out on your existing home.
Yeah.
Or up, I understand.
Any other questions? Okay, again, our focus is always student driven, so we want to make sure that our budget reflects that, and it really does. Speaking with all of the budget leaders, so, also the economic landscape, we've discussed this before with the increasing health insurance rates, the retirement system, and also just inflation due to the uncertainty with all of Ukraine and everything. So it's also reiterating the importance of reserve funds. And I go on a couple more slides. You have this workers' comp, you'll see. So I wanted to take the board through this.
Space.
So what you'll see, you have a historical perspective from 2015, 16, all the way to last year. So these are the audited numbers. And you'll see the workers' comp reserve, unemployment, retirement for ERS, retirement for TRS, which is a relatively new reserve, and an employee benefits accrued liability. So on the bottom, I've put yearly expenses. You'll see it's in purple. So typically a reserve can have, it's suggested that you have at least 3 times your yearly expense. So what I've done is I've provided, you'll see 1.8 million for workers' comp. That reserve has $1,038,000 in it. So you're like 55% funded. And then if you look at the next one, your unemployment, you're actually, you're fully funded there. But sometimes with unemployment, if you have a lot of layoffs or something, God forbid, you would know that you can still be safe. The retirement reserve, you can see you're only 37% funded. And the TRS reserve, you can see you're about 8%, which this is a new reserve, so that makes sense. But if you look over to the right in the yellow, this is your current budget, the 167 million. So districts are, by law, allowed to have a 4% undesignated, which is called the fund balance. Most industries or organizations have between 10 to 15%. A lot of school districts, looking at all of the reserves, they'll have around 30%. We only have 8.9% with total, all of these reserves plus your undesignated. So the goal of the district, I believe, has been to increase these reserves because of the economic uncertainty. We want to make sure that if we ever do have a cut to our state aid or any other significant challenge, that we would be able to weather the storm. So right now, we have preliminary fund balance projections, and I still have to go over them. But our treasurer is thinking at the end of this year, we may have close to $4 million to add to the reserves. So when we get to the revenue section, you'll see I've already put $2 million to go back to the taxpayers. So that has actually reduced what the taxpayer's burden would be. Is there?
I do have a
Yeah.
question. So you're saying the $4 million has not been included in this figure, correct? So the $4 million we could spread out throughout all the reserves?
Yes, and,
Well, half of it.
well, yes, because I'm
Throughout all of our
suggesting,
reserves?
Two
Right,
million.
right, right, so that's my other question. So the suggested 2 million that we're gonna talk about further down so this undesignated number of 6.6 would not include the 2 million, right? That 2 million,
correct,
okay.
it would be
The 2
additional.
million is coming out of the additional 4, and we
Yes.
would have 2 million to spread around the reserves.
Yes,
Gotcha, thank you.
so these numbers are what was audited by, our auditors.
Gotcha, thank you. So
So-
6.6 is at 4%,
Yes,
and so theoretically, the other 2 million could not go into the undesignated, it would have to go into the other reserves, because we can't have more than 4%.
well, as your budget for next year, if we go out at, say, 173, that's gonna be a new limit, because it'll be 4% of the 173.
Oh, okay, so we
So
could put it, okay.
This will, we would want to have that at 4%, and then whatever was left over,
Gotcha,
you could put, and
gotcha.
we're also discussing capital
Right, so we
reserve.
could put it in, gotcha.
So,
Okay.
question, because I just want to make sure that I understand this, and I think I do. Maybe it's more like a philosophical question, but I want to understand the history, and I know you weren't here, but maybe some of the relics on the board can explain the history of it.
There are no relics.
Well, it's
Did you see me camera? No relics.
no relics. So, I just want to understand, so when you say that, so I know like this year, we basically reduced the taxpayer's burden by $2 million. And we're gonna plan to do that again next year. But when you say that reduced it, we're not removing it from the undesignated reserves, we're paying for it, I guess, out of the fund balance. So I just are we like in a loop of that we're in an endless loop of having to do that every year in order to sustain itself?
Well, it's all a matter of budgeting also. So
Yeah.
the 2% in the current budget, we're predicting that we're not going to expend as much as was budgeted. And we're also going to be receiving more revenue than we initially planned. So it's kind of the excess from the current year. So instead of placing all of the 2 million into reserves, that portion anyway, to reduce the tax levy, that's when we would be putting it in. And once you do that each year, if you don't do that, you would have to either reduce expenditures, or if you have more revenue coming in, you could back out of it. But this year.
Or pierce the cap.
Yes, or pierce the
That's
cap.
the option 3, right? Yes.
Because I guess what I'm trying to understand is like, what would happen if one year, like the chickens came home to roost, I guess, and there wasn't $2 million available from, like, say for this year, we didn't have $4 million surplus, we had a $1.5 million surplus. Would we then be in a situation for this like, that's what I'm trying to understand.
Well, you would have to look at your other reserves too, and you would say, okay, well, can we reduce expenditures? Are we gonna receive more state aid? Are we, is there somewhere that you could make up that difference? And you do have your other reserves, which are getting to where they should be,
So historically speaking,
Yeah.
and I wasn't on the board at this time, I just recall this, that brings up the point. There was a time when they did not wanna take from their, I think it was like 3 years ago, they didn't wanna take from undesignated or fund balance because it really was that 2%. They didn't have the excess to the limit that they wanted, maybe it was only $1 million. And they said at this time, we're gonna take from TRS and ERS. And in looking at TRS and ERS, we can take that and we can use that money in order to support kind of that and feed
But only,
that
I guess at the cost of.
So
and the
also
cost,
is-
and yes, so,
Yeah.
but that was another scenario that came up, so it's not like you're just playing with the excess or the fund balance, it's like she says, you've got multiple pots or buckets and it's kind of fungible with it.
But also historically, we have not always taken $2 million out of
Right.
reserves.
That's what I wanted to understand.
Right,
Yeah.
historically, we've started actually on a lower level, we would, took out $800,000 one year, we took $1 million, it really depends on the year. We could, as a board today, say, we are not taking 2 million out of reserves, and we could tell our administrators, you have option to, we could say, we want you to cut $2 million from this budget, because we're not giving you the 2 million. We could say as a board, no, we're gonna take our 2 million, we could say, we're not giving you the 2 million out of reserves, don't cut anything, so we as a board are going to decide to pierce the cap. Those are all within our, we could decide as a board to take 3 million out of reserves, right?
Right.
Or 4 million and put more things. It's really a game that we play with the numbers every year.
So that makes perfect sense. I think it's really good you laid that out for.
Cause I'm a relic.
Yeah, for the community to
For the
understand.
relic.
So I guess my question, following up on everything that you just said, and this is a discussion we could have. I'd be curious Dr. Heinz's thoughts, especially and Zahara's. Is this situation that we find ourselves in? Is it? And I don't know the answer. Is this like are we in a prudent situation, or are we like setting ourselves up for like a scary thing to happen in a year or two based on this? Because it seems to me like you have like last year's tax levy had $2 million that's basically being saved and then used to subsidize this year's tax levy, and then this year's tax levy will probably do the same thing, save $2 million that goes to next year's tax levy. Taxpayers are still paying for it. It's just like, but I guess does it put you in a situation where if revenues end up or expenses being much higher, that the following year you end up in a situation where you do have to make those choices that Emily just laid out? And I'm wondering if we should start doing it gently
Right,
over a
like,
few years.
You're saying gently reduce what we're.
I'm asking the question if that would be a
Yes.
more prudent approach.
Well, that was something I was hoping, when we heard we were getting all of this increase to foundation aid, we were like, all right, we can back off the reserves. But then you had health insurance that increased, you have all of the contractual expenditures, and, so you really couldn't back off now. But in the future, we may be able to, as we settle contracts and we look at things, we may have the opportunity. And that's really my goal and my suggestion for the district, is to gradually back off. But this year, I
It's
don't
not the
think
year.
you really can, especially that we know we may have that, so.
So it sounds like, in summary, then the answer is, yes, it is a situation we want to get ourselves out of. We just are not in a position to do it right now.
But, and also to make it clear, many school districts use their reserves also like this, and because having excess at the end of the year just is nice to have something to give back, but I think it is good to have a budget where you do have excess, because these budgets are very tight, and
Yes.
it's
Just can I be
Yeah,
the relic
please.
again? Port Washington has always been criticized in this, well, it's not necessarily criticism, but we've always prided ourselves not having very fat budgets. And that has always been one of the things that we've talked about. So, and this goes back to the pre-tax cap days, because once the tax cap came 11 years ago, we really had no choice. So it's really what you start with, right? Like, as we see every year, we have the year before that basically gets rolled over, and that's our starting point. So we've always been more frugal in our budgeting, because we've been very conscious of being responsible and not going too fluffy, because we don't want our taxpayers to be going, too much. So there is a balance that I think we need to keep in mind. So I understand, and I think we do want to get to a point where we have some flexibility, and these have been conversations that have been going on amongst the Board of Education for years, years, like when I started going to board meetings in 1996.
Told you you were a relic.
I'm a relic. So there's always been a discussion of why are we taking money out of reserves and the danger of taking money out of reserves. So, I'm just saying, I think we should just be careful not to say we're gonna be too fluffy, because we have a community that is very conscious and has made very strong points that we do not wanna have too much, and right? And I know
you
that's not what-
definitely don't have too much.
Right,
Yeah.
and I know we don't, so I just wanna say, like, we have to be just conscious of balance everything.
So I actually want to be clear. I agree with you, and
Yeah,
I was not
I know,
advocating.
but-
What I want to say is that I thought it was just important to say all of this
Yes,
so that people understand
yes.
that we are in fact being extremely fiscally cautious, and we're
Yes.
even basically subsidizing the
Yes.
the taxpayers
Yes.
with reserves
Yes.
even this year.
Yes.
Yeah.
Correct. So, any other questions?
A quick insurance question, which is, I see reserves, and I see that they're not that high, and I see workers' comp, and I see employee benefits. Are we self-insured?
No, well, for our dental, we are self-insured.
Okay, but
And-
workers' comp,
Well, workers' comp, you're part of a consortium, which you kind of are.
so if we get a
So
$2 million claim, who pays it? The insurance company or us?
The insurance company,
Okay,
yes.
that's my question. That makes me feel more comfortable with the reserve numbers.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
But the premium could increase, I guess,
Yeah.
is that's,
Yeah.
Yeah, but that's the trade-off, and so,
Yeah.
that's fine.
Great. Does anybody else? Okay.
Now, the next slide is the transfer to capital, which we discussed at the last board meeting. And you'll see, I tried to round it up, so I forgot to round it up, and then I quickly said, oh my gosh, I have to do it. So, and I did add the extra 100,000 to the escalation costs. So you'll see there, a lot of it focuses on the roof, projects. Okay, any questions on the transfer to capital? Okay, then I just wanted to put in a reminder for the public also about the recommendation for the proposition number 2, which is the addition of the budget for creation of a capital reserve. And this is a reserve that would be a maximum of $15 million for a term of 10 years, and it would be addressing ventilation issues and electrical upgrades.
I do have a
Oh,
question.
Sure. Oh, my question, actually, you just said something that made me, just procedurally. So this is up for a proposition, and it sounded like a few minutes ago you said at the end, as we're budgeting, we can decide for this year's budget to put funding into the capital reserve. If the capital reserve fails, then what happens, where does that fund, where does the monies go to? Do we just decide again after the budget vote as a
Well,
board?
Yeah, so you would want to, in June, put the money into reserve, so.
So
if
it's a
you know in
resolution
May-
after June then?
Yes,
Okay,
yeah,
perfect, that's
we'll
all I.
know in May that it was passed.
That's perfect, I just didn't know in the resolution, or the timeframe, so
Yes.
thank you.
So I'm not sure if I understand the procedure that you were talking about giving $2 million back to the taxpayers. And I'm thinking, wouldn't that $2 million then go into the capital reserves? Or do I not, I guess I don't understand the loop.
I believe there may be $4 million, and that's still just
So
a
we're
preliminary
bifurcating
number.
that.
Yes,
Okay.
so it's
once-
just kind of coincidence that it's.
And it's not a given that that whole 2 million would necessarily go into the,
100%.
into that capital
Right,
reserve. We're gonna have to have discussions.
100%,
Yeah.
I just was timelining it out for myself, yeah.
You understand
I
that?
do.
It's from the surplus, that 4 million
Yes.
surplus.
And just so everyone's clear, 4 million sounds like a big number, but on a
Yes.
$60 million budget, it's
Not that
really,
big.
Right.
it's a pretty small margin of error.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Okay, so then, the next slide I was going to look at is the estimated revenue slide. So what this does is, this is really where we are right now in time. So I have the budgeted 22-23, and for comparison, you'll see the 21-22. And if you look all the way to the right, you'll see the change over the prior year. So the use of facilities, I increased it by about 30,000 because we're looking into possibly another school renting our space for next year. So that's a slight increase. You'll see the state aid increase of the 3.5 million. And then you'll see the pilots increase by 300,000. So in total, you have an increase of 3.9. But then if you look below, this is using the different reserves or the fund balance. So I'm not recommending to use any of the reserves, but I am recommending the 2 million to offset the tax levy. And you'll see that last year you had a debt service. That has been, wiped out, basically. Yes, so you no longer have that revenue coming in. So, looking at this, you would have $1.2 million that you would need to look at to be below the tax cap.
Correct.
So, right, so April 1st is the budget, it should be coming from the state. And Albany is very optimistic that they will have an on-time budget. They're actually very optimistic that there may be additional funds, which I don't think is going to be a ton of money for us, but it could be around 300,000 or so. But, any questions on it?
Yes. So this 1.2 is what we would consider the gap.
Yeah, so if you
Okay.
look at the
There
last
goes that
slide.
famous number.
We
I
we have a
wanted-
special slide
Yeah.
about that.
I wanted to get away from calling it the gap, just so
Okay,
it
the
doesn't,
difference,
so how to
between-
balance the tax levy.
How to balance
So then my
the
next
budget.
question, is, this $176 million budget, the board has not been presented with what that looks like in terms of what is in it. We've been presented with the wish lists from all the different departments. So is this 1.7 the wish list? Is it everything that's on that wish list?
$176 million,
I mean,
for
what,
the,
yes. Is that, what is that number? Is
Okay.
that everything we've seen so far being presented to us, the whole wish list, everybody, what everybody wants in an ideal, wonderful world? Or has this been pared down to represent something the board hasn't seen yet?
Sure, so this, the whole process has started in November. We started, the principals were meeting with their teachers, and then December, Jessica and I met with the budget builders and everything. We did have more requests than what's here, but I've worked with Jessica and Dr. Hines and Dr. Shields to pare some of it down. What you were presented, that is all in here. So there were things people were requesting that we said, you know what, we knew we had a limit. But there were things that we thought were valuable, and we said if this is the year we could do it, let's put it in and look at it. So what I was going to do, next meeting, we have personnel, ELL, BOCES, and driver's ed and adult ed. We're gonna present that. I am starting to maintain a list of what is additional, what have people requested. So then we can like prioritize it and say to the board, okay, these are our priorities. This is what we would like to really see in there. These are some things that maybe we can push to another year. So that's really what the process would be. And on April 5th, that's something I
That's
thought
what
we
you're
could
gonna do.
discuss then, yeah.
I have a
And
few
we'll
questions,
have
but if
more-
anybody else has some, go ahead. Julie.
And it'll be a better discussion because we will hopefully have a real budget that we're dealing with in real numbers.
Right, the April
April
1st
first, right?
budget, right.
I was told March 31st was the numbers.
Oh,
Go ahead. Does anyone else, I have a few questions, but if anyone else has anything, go first.
So my question is more of a request for when we actually get the budget, because I'm new to this and there's a bunch of stuff that cannot be changed. And then there's a few things where you do have wiggle room and we're gonna have to be looking. So if you can help by color coding or in some way identifying the things for which, either can't be moved or can be moved, that would be, I think that would be helpful for me.
sure. So,
Julie nods, but we know she knows the Bible.
Mandated versus.
So
Right.
isn't
Right.
it, well,
Exactly.
there's
Yes.
that, but isn't
But
it
there's
also
also-
going to be what you're saying in this $176 million number is everything that we've been presented so far in all of our meetings?
right.
But that on April 5th, you may come to us and say, this was, you had all these presentations,
Right.
but this is what now the administration is coming to you. So theoretically, on April 5th, we won't have 170, we could not, perhaps not have $176 million. Or you could say to us, here's all the asks, and, we have to cut 1.2 million from the asks, and we recommend we cut these from the asks.
Yes.
And that's the flexibility,
Right.
that's the flexibility number,
And what I was gonna do is.
right? Do we understand that? I wanna make sure you and I are.
So I'm not 100% sure that I understand. I thought it would be a line item, like we'd be going in line item by line item.
No.
So what I had envisioned, and I think it's similar to what Emily, I would give you the things that we could wait until another year. I won't, like with utilities, I know what it needs to be. I'm not gonna say to you, hey, cut utilities, because, and So it's the things that are, not optionable, but just things that were requested that maybe right now we can't do it. So it's those types of things to see where we,
Most of it's additional staff,
yeah.
a lot of it are plus.
Always comes down to
Yes.
staff,
Always.
really.
And there's also a lot of support for ELL, expanding that and stuff, so, you know, maybe we can gradually do it, or just do half of it or something, you know, so, and you have the different BOCES things too, and,
Can I ask a question about BOCES? And I know you put in, so all the BOCES, you know, with what we've talked about in the CTE at the high school, the BOCES aid that is now being proposed to go up, and every, you know, the Senate is asking for more BOCES, will that help us? Yeah, I'm sorry, I took your. I know, but I know.
yeah, so that's a little confusing, because when I first heard it, and I was just up in Albany, and I said to, some of the people there, I said, so CTE, are you gonna reduce the amount that it costs for us to send students there? And I said,
Right.
because we're expanding our program, you know, so I'm thinking this is wonderful. They said what it actually is the people who work at BOCES.
Salaries, that's what.
Their
Oh.
salary is only eatable up to 30,000.
Yes,
So this seeks to make it 60,000.
right.
So it will, so when we get aid, they say a portion of it is eatable, not the entire
Right.
thing. So now instead of only saying 30,000 is of that person's salary, it's 60%. So it will help us. I'm not sure how much it's gonna help us, because one of, and I'm not sure if it's the Senate or the Assembly, one of them wants it just for the teacher's salary, the other one wants it for all support, everybody's salary. So I thought it was the Senate that they're proposing that it's all salaries, so that would probably help us more.
Can I, anyone else? Okay.
Sorry, I deviated from that,
No, no,
but
you-
just, when you said BOCES, I thought of it.
So,
Sorry.
what I'm a little bit confused about, or maybe not confused, but I'd like to maybe understand it a little better, is what is the, I'm actually gonna channel another prior Emily thing. And, last year, Emily kept saying, we are approving the 2019-2020 budget, when she was talking about like, what's the 21-22 budget gonna look like? Like, basically, it was the same, this year's school year was the same program as the 2019-2020, because we were trying to skip the COVID year, right? But they kind of kept referring to it to use that as like a baseline for comparison. I would like to understand what the baseline comparison of program is from 21-22 to 22-23, because you made the comment about the additional funding for ELL. We know we have 2 teachers we added for those sections in the elementary school. We have the phys ed teacher that was supposed to be added just for COVID. We have everything that was added from the ARP funds. All those things that were not part of the 2019-2020 school year, that we kind of picked up bits and pieces here and there. We need to understand what that number is, because I'm noticing that like the state aid is up, 32%, but we still have a gap of 1.2 million. I'm wondering if what's happening is that we're using that state aid pickup to kind of save our bacon on all of those things we added that weren't part of the general, I guess, that weren't originally part of like the general revenue, and maybe we have to have all those conversations again of these things that were questions as to whether or not they were supposed to be funded in perpetuity. They were all like kind of, things that were like the board has to decide if they're gonna continue funding this when the ARP runs out, because I'm not saying it's right or wrong, maybe we should, but I have a feeling that that's our answer for if we wanted to start squeezing getting into a more, fiscally responsible loop. That might be I just have a hunch that that's kind of what's happening here, is that $3 million is picking up all of those all those added programs.
Right, actually,
Yeah.
a lot of it is the health insurance that's
It is both,
eating
yeah.
up most of it. And
Yeah.
then you have your, just rollover of the salaries. There's salaries, you have a lot.
But I'm saying a lot of those
There's-
salaries were added
No.
one-off.
No,
Yes.
No.
there were,
Let's let Kathy.
sure, there were, ones added to the budget and everything, but small fraction of the 3.5. And that's something on Tuesday we're gonna be discussing is the personnel and
Okay.
what we're doing. So
Yeah.
I'm looking at the sections and if there are any reductions, which I believe this budget reflected one reduction of an elementary teacher based on the numbers that Jessica provides with the incoming class and stuff, so.
So, but I guess, but still, like, all of the ARP funded
So I think that's
positions.
the question that Adam is asking, and I know that we've had.
No, that's it's part of it,
But can
yeah.
I just make the clarification, and I just wanna put it out there. We've had kind of surface conversations about this and questions on the money that we have used, the ARP funding money that we have used to fund things such as the ICT classrooms, things such as the community liaison, such the social worker, and these are things that I'm coming off the top of my head. The board has asked, and I'm looking at you because I just feel like I just have to put it out there. The board has asked, how are we all committed to making sure that these programs continue? And if so, because year one, we used portion of ARP funds. Year two, as we have heard, we're using still some ARP funds and rolling some others into our general fund. Are we all committed, as a board of 7, to keep these programs in place? And if so, we need to be having this.
Exactly.
So I'm just putting it there.
That's exactly the
Because
question.
I know that's what
Yeah.
you're saying, and I feel like we're skirting around.
I was trying to be direct, I didn't mean to skirt, I thought I was, yeah.
Isn't that the
Okay.
question we're having,
Yeah.
isn't that the presentation and the discussion we're having on Tuesday? Because they're all tied to personnel is being presented.
Yes.
I'm assuming
Yeah.
that all of those personnel will be presented in that, and this will
They
be
will be.
part of that discussion,
I
right?
just wanted
And
to-
then
But they should be enumerated, like,
Right,
in other words,
well,
like,
it will
not in the big number.
So then, I
Yeah.
guess, so I guess that would be our ask for Tuesday,
You wanna
right?
spotlight the ones
Spotlight.
that are new, that are
ARP
coming out of
funds.
ARP.
ARP
into-
Well, I think
Yes.
everything that was added ad hoc as along in the last 2 years, that
From
that
the other
if you
funds.
paid attention to all the board meetings over the last 2 years, it'll be like, we have way to pay for this now, but then the board will have to decide if it pays for it going forward.
Right.
Because
So
we
the
have to decide that, I think, very clearly. We have to
Right.
say we are deciding that,
Got it.
yeah.
So, I'm sorry.
No,
Go ahead.
I know you've been saying that too.
I'm glad you brought up the extra phys ed teacher. I don't wanna make anybody unemployed.
Yeah.
But we added certain things specifically because of COVID. We added custodians because of COVID. And in my mind, even though that those salaries may be a small part of the budget, if they're now superfluous, right? So if it shows that we really don't need all of these extra people, or I'm just throwing it out there, if the ICT program is not what you thought it would be, I believe you do think it is what it is, but for us to hear, this is why it's effective, this is why it's needed, this is why we still need the 5 custodians additional, or maybe we only need 3. To me, every dollar matters. And so it may be small in comparison to the budget, but to me, small adds up to bigger. So I think it's important to know where we really need things that were added on and where we no longer need them.
Agreed.
Thank you.
We're good.
Yeah,
I think we're all on the same page then about what we'll hear on Tuesday.
Right.
Yeah. Do you wanna now talk about the, that last tab, or the last slide, or we?
Sure. Yeah, so really, how to balance the budget without exceeding the tax levy is what you're faced with. So you can either, to get below the tax cap, you could increase your revenues by 1.2 million. I'm not really sure if we have that ability. Reduce spending requests by the 1.2, or a combination of the two. If we see on April 1st, or hopefully sooner, that we'll be getting more state aid, we could take part of it. If we don't believe we're really gonna get all of it, we could take a portion. Or we could look at the requests as we were just discussing and reduce somewhat, or put it off until next year's budget.
How do we increase revenue by $1.2 million?
Right. We either use more reserves, you could have more state aid.
State aid.
But within our control, because we can't control.
Right,
It's
that's the
happening
whole
already, so
problem.
Is it basically boiling down to the reserves? Because we're not opening movie theaters or the
No,
religion
no,
agencies,
no,
right? We're beyond those
Or
conversations.
it's
Why
piercing
not?
the
Here's
cap.
the cap.
Or pierce the
Right.
cap, which I
Right,
think any of
here's
us
the
wanna
cap.
do,
So I was
so.
wondering what those
Yeah.
options are, and they're really not.
Right.
Piercing the cap is not realistic, I just want,
Right.
I think the community should hear that we say it, but it doesn't mean we're heading in that direction.
No.
I don't think there's
It's not
any
something I
will
would
on this board to do
recommend.
that, yeah.
I don't know.
Pretty much.
But if that choice is available.
I'd be Larry. You know, Larry Pearson. If a ghost of Larry will speak. I don't know. I know we Pearson.
Oh, go ahead.
Just one question in terms of the 1.2. Just to be clear, we're talking about requests that are above and beyond? We're not talking about having to cut program to get to that 1.2. We're talking about additional things that were asked of the district?
Not necessarily.
What's the answer?
It could be, yes, we would have to reduce potential staff or programs to get there.
The budget that
Right.
they are presenting to us right now is 1.2 million higher than the anticipated revenues.
That's
So
allowable.
it may be removing things that they want, and maybe keeping things they want and removing things that are old. We have to figure out, they have to figure out and tell us what they're.
I understand
yeah.
that, I understand that, but what we were talking about was the wish lists. So there's a difference between wish lists and cutting. So is this 1.2, I understand that we can
It's
do a
combination.
combination,
No, but
but if we went straight, no wish lists,
yeah.
and we stayed with program, are we within the tax cap is what I'm asking.
Well, no wish list,
Yeah.
ain't nothing that we've been presented with,
So, all right,
right?
so I think a way to partially answer your question is, something that's new and different that we are requesting for next year is the expansion of the CTE program, right? So the kids who go to BOCES, I think that's around $100,000, I believe, right?
Right, well, plus transportation, more like 2.
Okay, so that's something that would be new or different. If we talk about the ICT program, we have 3 teachers that we are looking to take from ARP funds, that's what we're paying it this year, to now have the general fund pay for it next year. So even though we have that program in place right now through ARP, now we're asking, the request is for it to go into the general fund. So that's a program that we have that's currently in place. So just 2 examples.
So it could be a little mix and match.
That's what I think it
And
is.
if you call it reallocation of resources instead of cutting, like there may be things that
Sure,
we don't need,
that's right.
but let's reallocate it to the ICT or to expanding the ELL program.
But what I just wanna make clear is that we're not, much of this could be just a wish list number versus cuts. I don't want the community to think that, oh my goodness, did you hear they're cutting 1.2 out of the budget? That's what
That's our hope,
potentially
is that it's-
could be said, and I just wanted to.
I don't think we're quite at that point yet, because we don't know.
Yeah, I don't know that we are
This is
yet.
like,
I
this
think
is
you're-
a snapshot in time.
Yeah.
So, like, you could find out more retirements, right? Or you could
Right.
find out about more revenue from
We
the
could
state.
get
So
1.2
this
million
could,
in
like,
aid.
last year it shrunk
That's my
over the
goal.
course of the process.
Yeah.
And then, so, you know what I mean? So I think it's a
No
little.
more retirement.
Yeah.
No more
And
retirement.
I would say, it has shrunk, right? It has shrunk over this process, even
Yes.
from your starting
Oh,
point.
gosh.
We are
To now, right?
Yeah.
So,
I
Yeah.
just don't want it to be out there that we have a $1.2 million gap,
But we-
because that'll be
Right.
but we
Right
did
now.
right today.
As of where we stand at this moment with the
Yes.
wish list.
with the wish
Right.
list.
And this
And I
happens
think-
every year.
Yeah.
So, yeah, so it's always
Right.
higher, we whittle it
Right.
down, whittle it down.
And I
we
think
get it to
that,
where
I
it
think
is.
the big asterisk that is very important to say out loud and for us all to keep in our mind is that every day we look at the budget through this process, it is ever changing. So what we see today and what we see on Tuesday is going to look different because certain things have happened. More retirements have come in, state aid, it's not gonna come in by Tuesday, but different things happen. Everything here is fluid today until we adopt this budget on April 12th. So everything we talk about can change, right? So and every day, every presentation is new and different, and that's the part of this process.
Is it helpful to know what the number would be if we kept everything the same from this year, however it was funded? If we kept everything the same and came up with that number, and then looked to see how much leeway we had to get to add whatever we need to add to the wish list, or is that not really viable because there are things we have in this budget that may have fallen off, and so there's extra money, and so it's not really a good apples to apples comparison. Is that a not prudent way? I'm not a finance person. So is that not an unprudent way to look at it?
It's a different way of looking at it, to analyze things. It depends on how, I guess, we all process things differently. So if that's what kind of would work for you, I understand that. It is difficult to do that. I mean, it's basically a rollover budget. If we just incremented everybody's salary, we had the contractual, and this is where you are. What I've done is I've started to compile a list of things that have increased significantly, and I'm already at like 1.3. So those are things that have been requests that have been additional. So, but a lot of those things are important, and I think they're important to the board also too. So to call it a wish list isn't really fair because they're necessary, some of them. So it's really looking at what we're currently doing and see, can we do it better? Are there needs for our students that we could somehow meet those needs better?
But I think what's really important for us to like be, I guess, honest about, and for the community to understand, is that there are certain programs that are maybe very necessary.
Mm-hmm.
However, the community never approved a budget that included them, but people are used to having them. For example, the ICT classrooms, right? Anyone who's in those classrooms thinks that that's like a baseline now, and they're gonna have it next year. They probably don't realize that the taxpayers never funded those, right? Those came from federal grants.
It was pretty clear last year, it was made very clear.
No, it wasn't.
You're making a statement now
No,
that's
I
not
think
true
it's
about
very-
last year.
I think it's completely true because it was listed, we're paying for this with
With
federal.
ARP funds.
Yeah, so now, this year, the taxpayers have to pay for them, and that's different than what it was last year. Because last year, it was kind of like a pilot, it worked, it sounds like, based on what we heard, everyone's very happy with it. So it's probably the correct thing for the taxpayers to pay for it, but it is a big change from, what was
No,
funded by
but
our community. Our
but-
community
but-
didn't fund it last year.
No, I know that.
Uncle
but
Sam
what-
did.
all I'm saying
Yeah.
is that it wasn't a secret, you're making it, I just wanna be clear, nobody was.
No, I don't think, it was very public,
Okay.
it was very public.
I just wanna make sure
What I'm
that's-
saying we have to be honest about is that
And we need to
it's a
be-
big increase
Correct.
to the taxpayer budget or to the appropriation, I guess. And
It's $1 million.
yeah, that's a big
Right,
number.
absolutely.
And what I think is probably what's happening is that that program is probably being saved by the increase in the state aid, right?
You could look at that.
Because if you didn't have that increase in the state aid, we would have to, we'd have to be cutting other things to keep that program.
Yeah, right, that's
Yeah.
what we said from the very beginning, right? We
Right.
as a board have a choice, we can cut, we can go above, like, that's the thing, but I
Right.
think the point that you made, and I think you made it earlier, is that we need, as a board, to have a very public kind of agreement
Exactly.
that we are committed to these programs, because, I understand what you're saying, that this is a program that we've added and it was used through ARP funds and now, but I think we've heard from our superintendent, we've heard from, Stephanie Allen, that this is a way to teach, and this is a program that, I know, based on, from hiring Dr. Hines, this has always been a goal of his, he always wanted to put ICT.
And we've only gotten good feedback. We've had emails from parents and so
So what we need to be able to do is,
right.
just the way we're committed to PEP as a school board, we should be able to, I think, publicly say that we are committed to these programs and that there's a cost, because there's a cost to everything that is
So that's the
extra.
part that I'm saying we have to be
Right.
honest about, is we have to
Yes.
come out and
I
say,
agree.
we are now, this year's
Agreed.
board is, because last year's board didn't approve that. That was something that the district was able to do
Correct.
unilaterally. I don't mean that in a bad way. Was able to do with money that came in because it was grant money. Now the board has to basically say, we are approving a budget,
That
that
includes
includes
this
that.
programming and we're committed to it.
really
And you're being
right.
transparent.
Correct, that's what I'm saying.
Yes,
Maybe
yes.
we'll get it
Transparent,
on this.
transparent.
Transparent.
Yeah.
My favorite word.
Clear,
So,
Yeah.
yeah.
I just
We
wanna,
were transparent last year.
because I don't want
Yes.
the audience who may be listening either now or in the future, you could substitute ICT for any program that
totally.
we have
Yes.
here.
Right.
But to your point, this is something that's new and different that would be in the general fund. I think it's worth noting, and that's why, when we, at the state of the district and everything else, we have to have our non-negotiables as far as what we wanna see for our kids. I will say, I don't know of any other school district that does not have an ICT program at the elementary level on Long Island. That's part of the reason why, on our road to excellence, to have those things that all school districts would have. So, reallocation of funds, and you brought that up before, I think that's really important. Just because there is a deficit right now, or things that we are looking to reduce, it doesn't mean we can't look elsewhere. And I'm not saying other programs will be slashed, but there are other places we can look that maybe are not program related, that we can take a look at, that's all I'm saying.
And also a major focus of this budget is supporting mental health issues for our students, because we need those supports in place with everything we've gone through. Just removing the masks, that's a major change for even adults as well as the students, you know, so I think that's important for the community to understand that there's a focus on the mental health.
So I don't, like, again, I don't wanna belabor the point, and Dr. Hines, I wanna be very clear, like, I'm not in any way advocating we shouldn't do that. What I just wanna make sure that we understand is, like, going back to my original question about the 2 million, that, you know, about whether or not it's fiscally prudent to shrink it, and you had made the comment that, like, not now in this environment, but we are in fact growing the program of the Port Washington School District next year. And we as a board should understand that we're making the choice to grow the program instead of contracting.
Which I think is a good
Yeah,
thing, by
I'm
the way.
just want,
I
I'm not
should
saying
say-
otherwise. I just wanna make
Okay.
sure that we are eyes wide open, making the choice, because it's not like an austerity budget. This is in any way, shape, or form, right? This is, we're working towards our district goals and our board goals and our portrait of a graduate and all of that. So when we start meeting with HSAs and the community starts talking about the budget,
We explain.
this is a positive
Right.
improvement to the district. This is not, again, an austerity budget.
And
Yeah.
that cannot be lost, Adam. I
Right.
think you said that really well, because the truth is, again, relic, we've been criticized in past years that it was basically an increase in the taxes, because unfortunately every year the taxes do go up, but,
Right.
and that we were giving nothing back. And that, you know, there were times that we've had to cut programs, right? So I think at this point in the game, and I know we're all hyped into the, you know, okay, we gotta get the budget, it is March 18th. We are at a good place based on my relic experience of having a 1.2 million hole right now, balance that we have to find. And that we are discussing as a school board, adding programs and adding staff and changing some of, you know, giving some more opportunities for more students. I think that's a positive
Totally.
as a board, and so I think we're in a good spot. I'm not, you know, I've been sat here and been panicked in the past, thinking what the heck. So I think we'll be okay, I think.
And one of the things I would like to do after this whole process is over and our budget passes, I would like to sit with the board and see what could we do differently next year to improve the process or make it more efficient, you know, so. Because it's your first time, it's my first time with you guys, like I'm used to certain
Right.
things.
Right.
Well, maybe we can have a budget meeting in June or even, I don't know, July.
Right.
Like,
Yeah.
to talk
Yes.
about it.
You could talk about it on
Yeah.
May 23rd.
Right.
You have projects for summer work,
Right.
and you
Totally.
can talk about a recap of the budget process,
So we
right?
have
Maybe
to,
really fresh.
budget.
It's not.
It's on this agenda,
Ah,
it's
got it,
on the
got it.
agenda here.
Oh, perfect. Yeah, that's perfect.
Can I ask a question, are you still having the meeting on Monday, April 11th? Or do you wanna,
So I was thinking about that. I would propose that we keep the date on the calendar, just in case we need like another one of, and we may end up, you may end up taking it over as like a board meeting. I don't know, just if we need something, let's just hold the date. Everyone comes anyway, and then we can always,
And maybe
Yeah.
we can review what's being, I mean, you have the board adoption on the 12th.
12th, yeah,
Right.
so it might.
So I don't think it's the worst
We
idea.
can review it, yeah, so
I'm
people
just saying
understand.
maybe move it to the Friday before, see, I'm just talking if in
That's
case
not a bad
we
idea.
need it.
I do it this time, this place.
Yeah.
I'd rather.
That's what I'm thinking, only because if there's still questions from board members, right?
Yeah.
And
Yes,
we
Kathy,
do
the
have to
opportunity.
actually adopt the budget on the 12th. Give us a few days to try to
That
process
makes a lot of sense.
questions or make changes.
And
Or right, or if you have to make
Give
changes.
Kathy the opportunity to make
Right.
changes.
Do you wanna do that?
We have
Just make
curriculum
sure.
on April 8th.
You wanna switch that to the Monday time? You wanna swap them?
Oh, that's a good idea.
Should we ask
It's not
Rach?
We have to ask Rachel and we have to ask,
Ira and Dave
Dr. Hernick
and
and,
Victoria, right?
Okay.
April 8th is what we're
Yeah.
looking at.
Yeah, but that's a good,
So
If that
let's
works for everyone, we
propose-
should, we
let's
could maybe swap
propose
them,
it, yeah.
cause I think
can
Yeah.
I
Please coordinate
take
that.
on that job?
that would be
For some
fantastic.
reason, it is sticking with me. Oh,
Are you
that's fine.
here?
She's
You're
I'm
not
here. My son gets deployed, he's going to Kuwait, and
Oh,
he leaves
wow.
on the 8th, that's what it is.
So do you have to be there?
No, I'm gonna see him on the 4th, not that everybody has to know.
Now that everyone knows, yes.
So I'm here that Monday, but.
Oh, we would do 8:30.
Okay, so I'm gonna see if we can switch for 8
For
budget.
8:30, right?
Mrs.
nine.
Marconi?
No, you wanna do
Oh, wait,
4-8
are we
budget
doing
at 9:30?
9:30?
Can we do earlier? Can we do 9? Does that work for
9,
everyone?
where's,
9:30 is like a weird time.
okay, and then
We're
make
not having-
4-11, make 4-11 curriculum.
you should check with
And-
Rachel Gill.
Well,
our
that's-
building
that's
She's
trustee.
going to.
said I was
She's
gonna
going
do
to do
that.
that, yeah.
I think Mrs. Marconi had
She'll be here.
was raising her hand while we do this.
Kathy, we were discussing, a process for inquiring about what the cost would be for us to provide interpretation services through BOCES for our BOE meetings next year, and what that impact or add would be to our school budget. Can you provide that information for us?
I'm sure I can inquire and get it. Are you talking about sign language interpretation
No,
or
No.
Spanish?
Just like we have
Only
in the state of
Spanish?
Michigan.
Okay.
Yeah.
For the committee
Okay.
meetings
Only
and the
Spanish?
Board of Education.
I don't know.
Well, let's
The
find
women's
out
been
what's
asking
involved.
about Spanish.
There's
No,
also,
I've been asking just
we
general.
would also, I mean, just,
information,
we would also need at
not
least
specific.
probably Japanese
Well,
and
then-
maybe
But then,
one or two others in this.
so this,
So, okay, I just have a, so here, so I think, yes, Kathy, I think that if we could just get the costs, and then I know that you're talking, maybe you could add this part of your ELL, BOCES, numbers, requests, and we can put that in towards, clearly that would add to the 1.2, but I also think we need to just get a sense from you as well, if this is something that you would recommend for next year, or if you would recommend a different process. I know the board has had the feeling or the belief that we need interpreters, but, you know, I don't know what our ELL department thinks, and so I would personally like to ask Priscilla, is that what she thinks is important? Because what if the interpreting is not for board meetings, but it should go towards more, you know, specific events like FAFSA meetings? Like, I don't know,
That's a fair point to
Exactly.
ask, where the priority
Yes.
is.
So
where is the
Priorities.
priority? Is it in
For
our
that.
board
Right.
meetings, or, like, does she need it, or does she have so that's, if we, I mean, we do clearly want, as a Board of Education and as district, we've talked a lot about being inclusive and having the ability for everyone to have access. So where is the need? I think we think there's a need for board meetings, but I don't know that that's the case of the community, or the actual
I think
community that we wanna serve.
we're gonna use Kathy's words throughout now. Reallocation we'll use and priority.
Right.
Right, priorities does not mean that it will never happen, it just means we need to do it in the right order. So from that standpoint, right?
But we should
what's
get the costs.
I agree with that.
Yeah, I think we should like, we can do these two things simultaneously, which is ask
Yeah.
and then get the cost.
Just so I'm clear what cost I'm actually asking for. The person would come to the meeting and be speaking as the person is speaking, or do they take what was recorded?
No,
No.
And
no,
interpret
it'll be
it?
live.
Live.
It would be live.
They would sit in the room with
So
us.
the way we did it at the
With
state of the
earphones.
district, what did it cost us at the state, do you remember?
I don't recall, but we went through BOCES, and there was a process we would go to. So we can ask Priscilla, we can map out the cost it would be for all the board meetings next year, and see what that cost is, and then we can ask Priscilla for other events throughout the year, look at that cost, and then let you know.
But
Should
I
we
will
also
say,
I
look
think
at-
the committee, oh, go ahead.
I'd ask Priscilla, where is the need?
Yeah.
That's what I'm more concerned
And
about.
if we wanted to hit like a wider net, and we only had X dollars, should we also look at doing like transcription, which I think is much cheaper than live? Meaning like, you get like a transcript, and they can caption it in some,
But
subtitle.
we have been doing our recaps in Spanish as well.
I understand, I'm talking
Right.
like,
Yes.
YouTube,
So
you could have,
during
you
the
could have,
thing.
you could have like multiple language captions.
So
on the-
Priscilla,
or no, not
so-
during live stream, on the recorded, actually, you
I
can do it
think
on
we
live
already,
stream too,
we already do that through YouTube, I think the closed captions can be.
not in other
translated.
language, but I
Oh,
don't think
okay.
I love, you can't do it the way it's set up right
Priscilla
now.
heard us.
I know, Priscilla's presentation simultaneously while she was
She
presenting, there
was.
were captions in both English and, in Spanish and in
It
Japanese.
just needs to be set
So
up,
she has the capabilities,
Yeah.
right, exactly.
So I'm saying as a backup option, if like we don't have the dollars, we should at least look at turning that on.
Okay.
Yeah, that's
on all
actually
of our-
different, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I asked about that in the tracker, but I didn't hear anything.
Well,
What's about? Yeah,
we've asked a couple, yes, well, that was on the Zoom one, right?
Correct.
I think another piece of this is that it may be that it's more than just Spanish interpretation.
Mhm.
Right,
I know we have a large population of Chinese and Japanese families as well. So if we're being inclusive, we're being inclusive.
So it would be,
I-
we would have three, I'm just using the board meeting as an example. We would have 3 interpreters for one board meeting, 1 for each language,
Right.
right?
Yeah,
I
I asked-
understand.
As a person who doesn't know the technology services, that doesn't know the expertise of the staff, I was asking how we apply interpretation services. I don't have a wish for how it gets done, I have a wish for inviting these communities of
Yep.
people to our meetings.
Yep.
That's my goal. How it gets done is unimportant to me.
Okay.
You're the what, right? And they're the how.
No, I'm just trying to clarify, because if, so I agree with you, if we can have more of our community come out that speaks predominantly one language, if we're going to have someone who's interpreting, my assumption, I'm assuming, they would interpret in one language. So if we're looking at the 3 most spoken languages, we would probably need 3, that's the only reason why I'm asking. Because I wanna look at the costs, speak to Priscilla, other events, and then see where we are with that, and then of course with the rest.
I think that's where it's gonna land, just if you think about those, yeah.
Okay.
Cause you get more bang, you get more mileage out of your dollar.
Yep. All right.
I guess there's no community comments. There's
no, there's nobody.
there's no way, there's one way.
It's one way.
Yeah, so any other new business? This was really the topic that we had for today. So I thank everybody in the community who watched this or will watch it, and we thank everybody, all the administrators who are spending their time with us, and all the board members, and everybody have a great weekend.
See you on Tuesday.
Thank you,
Yeah.
thank you, thank you.
Thank you.
Wait.
I'm not sure, we have to have John tell us if he's
Oh,
offline.
yes.
Just